The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's eyes were filled with hope and vulnerability as she looked at Mark across her pristine office desk. He stared back, completely stunned by what his boss had just asked him. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Mark finally found his voice. "You want me to, what?" If you're wondering how a simple conversation between a boss and her employee led to this life-changing moment, stay with me. This story might just change how you see family, sacrifice, and the unexpected connections that shape our lives. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that touch the heart. Mark Wilson never planned on being a single father. At 34, he had imagined a different life, one with a partner, maybe 2 kids, and certainly not the chaotic apartment he now shared with his 5-year-old daughter, Emma. But life rarely follows our carefully laid plans. 3 years ago, Mark's wife Olivia died unexpectedly from an undiagnosed heart condition, leaving him alone with their 2-year-old daughter. The grief had nearly consumed him, but Emma needed him. So each morning, he pushed himself out of bed, made breakfast, braided Emma's hair. YouTube tutorials had become his best friend, and somehow kept moving forward. Mark had been working at Horizon Publishing for nearly 7 years when Sarah Chen took over as the new CEO. At 41, Sarah was brilliant, driven, and respected throughout the industry. She had transformed the struggling publishing house into a digital powerhouse in just 18 months. Everyone admired her, including Mark, who had been promoted to senior editor under her leadership. What most people didn't see was the loneliness that sometimes flickered across Sarah's face when she thought no one was looking. The same loneliness Mark recognized from his own mirror. Their professional relationship had always been cordial but distant. Sarah was his boss, after all. They exchanged pleasantries in the hallway, discussed projects in meetings, and occasionally made small talk at company events. Nothing more. Until the day Emma got sick. It was a typical Tuesday when Mark's phone rang during an editorial meeting. Emma's school was calling, she had a high fever and needed to be picked up immediately. Mark apologized profusely as he gathered his things to leave. "Family comes first," Sarah said simply, waving away his apologies. "Go." The next day, when Emma's fever hadn't broken, Mark called in to work from home. To his surprise, Sarah texted him personally to check on Emma's condition. When he mentioned they were waiting on a prescription but he couldn't leave Emma to pick it up, Sarah offered to drop it off on her way home. "You don't have to do that," Mark protested. "You're the CEO." "I'm also a human being," she replied. "Text me your address." That evening, Sarah arrived at his door with not only the medicine but also a container of homemade chicken soup and a stuffed unicorn for Emma. "My mother always made this soup when I was sick," she explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "It might help." Mark was touched by the gesture. "Would you like to come in? It's not much, but I can offer you coffee or tea." Sarah hesitated before accepting. Mark's apartment was modest but warm. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator, photos lined the walls, and toys were scattered across the living room despite his hasty attempt to tidy up. "Sorry about the mess," he said, clearing a pile of laundry from the couch. "Don't apologize," Sarah said, smiling. "It looks like a home." They talked for nearly 2 hours that night. Not as boss and employee, but as two people sharing stories. Sarah told him about growing up in a traditional Chinese-American family with high expectations. How she'd focused so intensely on her career that relationships always took a back seat. Mark shared stories about Emma, about the challenges of single parenthood, about keeping Olivia's memory alive for their daughter. "You're doing an amazing job with her," Sarah said softly as she prepared to leave. "Not everyone could handle what you've been through." "Some days I'm not sure I'm handling it," Mark admitted. "But she's worth every struggle." Something shifted between them after that night. At work, they maintained their professional relationship, but there was a new understanding, a foundation of friendship. Sarah would occasionally ask about Emma, and Mark would share funny stories about his daughter's latest adventures. Over the next few months, Sarah became a regular visitor at their home. She would bring books for Emma, who had taken an immediate liking to Ms. Sarah and her exciting stories about faraway places. Sometimes Sarah would join them for dinner, or they would all go to the park together on weekends. Emma adored her. "Ms. Sarah knows everything, Daddy," she would say with wide-eyed admiration. Mark couldn't help but notice how natural Sarah was with Emma, despite her claims that she had little experience with children. There was a gentleness to her that few at work ever witnessed. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Mark sat on his small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said, her voice unusually hesitant. "Of course. Do you ever think about having more children?" The question caught him off guard. "I haven't really thought about it. Being a single parent is already challenging enough with one child." Sarah nodded, looking out at the city lights. "I always thought I'd have time. That I could focus on my career first, then start a family when I was ready." She took a sip of wine. "Now I'm 41, and my doctor is using phrases like advanced maternal age and declining fertility." "You'd be an amazing mother," Mark said sincerely. "Would I?" She looked uncertain. "I've spent my whole life in boardrooms, not playgrounds. I've seen you with Emma. You're a natural." Sarah smiled at that, but there was sadness behind it. "The thing is, I'm not seeing anyone. Dating as a CEO is complicated. Men are either intimidated by my position or only interested in what it represents." She sighed. "And the fertility treatments I've been trying haven't been successful." Mark reached out and squeezed her hand supportively. "There are options. Adoption, surrogacy. I've considered them all," she said. "But adoption can take years, and finding a surrogate is complicated." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Sarah checked her watch and said she should go. At the door, she hugged him goodbye, holding on a moment longer than usual. "Thank you," she said. "For listening." "Anytime," he replied, meaning it. 2 weeks later, Sarah invited Mark to lunch. They rarely ate together during work hours, both too busy with their respective responsibilities, so he knew something important was on her mind. They sat in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant near their office. Sarah seemed nervous, rearranging her silverware and barely touching her food. "Everything okay?" Mark asked. Sarah took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation. About family, children, the future." Mark nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've made a decision," she said. "I'm going to try one more round of IVF with a sperm donor. It's my last chance, really." "That's great," Mark said encouragingly. "I hope it works out." Sarah looked directly into his eyes then, her expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Mark, I know this is unconventional, and please feel free to say no, but..." She paused, gathering courage. "Would you consider being my donor?" The restaurant seemed to fade away. Mark stared at her, certain he had misheard. "You want me to help you have a baby?" he finally managed to say. "I know it's a lot to ask," Sarah said quickly. "And I would never expect you to be involved beyond donation if you didn't want to be. I can draw up legal agreements protecting you from any financial responsibility." "Sarah, You're kind, intelligent, and I've seen what an incredible father you are," she continued, words tumbling out nervously. "Your genetic contribution would be a gift, nothing more. Unless..." She hesitated. "Unless you wanted some involvement. As a friend, perhaps." Mark's mind was racing. This was his boss asking him to father her child. It was unprecedented, complicated, potentially disastrous for their professional relationship. And yet, he thought about Sarah with Emma, her patience, her kindness, the joy on her face when Emma mastered a new word or skill. He thought about Sarah's loneliness, so similar to his own. He thought about our evening had never happened. But something held me back, curiosity, perhaps, or the lingering image of Sarah's vulnerable expression when she'd asked for my help. Honesty, I finally said. If we're going to do this, no more surprises. We plan everything in advance. We establish boundaries. And you tell me the real reason if there's more to this than avoiding your mother's matchmaking. Sarah studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Then she nodded. Deal. And that was how I, Daniel Chen, reluctant marketing associate, became the fake boyfriend of Sarah Winters, marketing director and my direct superior. A recipe for disaster? Absolutely. But also the beginning of the most unexpected chapter of my life. Our relationship required rules. We drafted them over coffee the next morning, a Saturday that I had planned to spend sleeping in, but instead found myself in a quiet corner of a cafe, creating guidelines for our fictional romance. Rule number 1, no physical contact beyond hand-holding and the occasional arm around shoulders. Rule number 2, all family events to be scheduled at least 1 week in advance. Rule number 3, consistent backstory to be memorized by both parties. Rule number 4, no telling anyone at work. Ever. Rule number 5, either party can end the arrangement at any time, no questions asked. This feels like negotiating a business contract, I remarked as Sarah typed the list into her phone. Isn't that essentially what it is? She replied without looking up. Most relationships don't start with terms and conditions. Most relationships aren't fake. She set her phone down. Speaking of which, we need a convincing story of how we got together. Something believable but not too specific. We spent the next hour crafting our fictional romance. According to our agreed-upon narrative, our professional relationship had gradually evolved into friendship through late nights at the office. The turning point came during a business trip to Chicago 2 months ago, a trip that had actually happened, though Sarah had spent it in meetings while I visited old friends. In our revised history, I had shown her my favorite spots in my former hometown, and something had shifted between us. First kiss? Sarah asked, making notes with the same focused efficiency she brought to marketing strategies. I nearly spilled my coffee. Do we need to be that detailed? My mother will ask, she said matter-of-factly. She always does. So we decided on the Chicago River walk at sunset, after a day of sightseeing. Romantic but not overly so. Plausible deniability built in. What about real relationships? I asked. What if one of us starts dating someone for real? Sarah looked up, seeming genuinely surprised by the question. Do you have someone in mind? No, I admitted. But it could happen. Then we end this arrangement, she said simply. That's what rule number 5 is for. It all seemed so straightforward in theory. A temporary arrangement with clear boundaries and an exit strategy. What could possibly go wrong? The first test of our fake relationship came sooner than expected. The following weekend, Sarah's cousin Amy was having a bridal shower, and Sarah was expected to bring her new boyfriend to the family dinner afterward. It's just a small gathering, she assured me as we drove to her aunt's house in Cambridge. 20 people, tops. 20 people is a small gathering to you? You should see our Thanksgivings. I adjusted my tie nervously. We should have practiced more. What if someone asks something we didn't prepare for? Sarah took her eyes off the road long enough to give me a reassuring glance. Just follow my lead. And remember, you're doing great so far. The strange thing was, I believed her. Despite the bizarreness of our arrangement, there was something almost exhilarating about it, like being in a play where only 2 people knew the script. Plus, I was seeing a side of Sarah I never encountered at work, more relaxed, occasionally even playful. It was nice. The dinner was held in her aunt's sprawling Victorian home, where family photos covered nearly every wall. I found myself studying them, picking out Sarah in various stages of life, a serious-eyed child with braids, a teenager with braces and determination, a college graduate with proud parents flanking her. It humanized her in a way our office interactions never had. "So, Daniel," her Uncle Robert boomed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Sarah tells us you're quite the marketing whiz." "I wouldn't go that far," I said modestly. "Your niece is the real talent." "Always was," he agreed. "Even as a kid, she could sell anything. Remember the lemonade stand, Sarah?" Sarah groaned. "Please don't tell that story." "She was 8, Robert continued, ignoring her protest. "Set up a lemonade stand like any other kid, but Sarah? She created different, premium, versions. Regular lemonade for 50 cents, but for $1 you got, special reserve with a mint leaf. For $2, executive platinum with a fancy glass and a little umbrella. Made $80 in one afternoon." I laughed, genuinely delighted by this glimpse into her childhood. "That sounds exactly like her. How did you two finally get together?" Amy asked, her eyes bright with romantic curiosity. "Sarah's never brought anyone to family functions before." All eyes turned to us expectantly. Sarah began reciting our practice story, but something about the moment, the warmth of the room, the genuine interest in these people's faces, made me want to offer something more authentic. "I think what really drew me to Sarah," I said, gently interrupting her rehearsed account, "was seeing how passionate she is about her work. It's not just a job to her, she genuinely cares about doing things right. That kind of integrity is rare." Sarah fell silent, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Had I said too much? Deviated too far from our script? But then her hand found mine under the table, a gentle squeeze that felt different from the performative gestures we'd practiced. "Daniel sees the best in people," she told her family. "Even when they don't make it easy." The evening flowed more naturally after that. I found myself genuinely enjoying the company of Sarah's family, her aunt's dry wit, her younger cousin's tech enthusiasm, even her grandmother's slightly inappropriate questions about our future plans. By the time we left, I had almost forgotten we were playing roles. "That went well," Sarah said as we drove back to the city. "You're a natural." "Your family is nice," I replied. "They really love you." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she finally said. "They do." "Can I ask you something?" I ventured. "Why are you so different with them than you are at work?" Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "At the office, you're all business. Focused. Sometimes intimidating. But with your family, you're more. I don't know. Open." She considered this for so long I thought she might not answer. "Different contexts require different versions of ourselves," she finally said. "The Sarah who runs marketing campaigns isn't the same as the Sarah who grew up in that house. Which one is the real you?" Her eyes remained fixed on the road. "They both are. Neither is. I don't know." A pause. "Does it matter?" "I think it might," I said softly. "To you, at least." She dropped me off at my apartment with a simple, "thank you," and a promise to text me about the next family event. As I watched her car disappear down the street, I realized our arrangement had just become considerably more complicated than either of us had anticipated. At work, nothing changed, at least not officially. Sarah was still my demanding boss, critiquing my proposals and pushing me to refine my strategies. But there were subtle shifts. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me during meetings with an expression I couldn't decipher. Occasionally, she'd ask about my weekend or mention a book she thought I might enjoy. Small things that wouldn't raise eyebrows among our colleagues but felt significant in the context of our secret. The weeks passed, and our fake relationship developed its own strange rhythm. Family dinners. Sunday brunches. A gallery opening where Sarah's mother was showing her watercolors. Each event added new layers to our fabricated history, new inside jokes, new shared experiences that blurred the line between performance and reality. And then came the wedding. Amy's wedding was held at a historic estate outside Boston, all rolling lawns and centuries-old oak trees. Sarah wore a deep blue dress that made her eyes look like the ocean after a storm. I wore my only good suit and tried not to stare at